Okay, so welcome everybody. I want to just welcome you. I don't know if you're interested more in the milling of the grains in storage or the canning. We're going to do two parts. So I'm going to talk about the grains and how to store them and mill your grain into flour. Then we're going to do a little break. I'm going to have a drawing. You got a ticket. So we're going to do 2 door prizes and then a short break, and then we're going to have save your ticket because we're going to have another 2 at the end of the canning session. So how many of you have had your parents or your grandparents grew a garden? Okay. How many of you grow a garden now? Good. Okay. How about canning? Did parents or grandparents can? And how many of you can now? Wow. Okay, so that's great. That's a really good skill to have. So I grew up about 10 miles from here on a farm, and when I was old enough to ride my bicycle on the edge of the road, I would ride my little banana seat bicycle over to my grandparents who lived right next door. And so I would go into my grandparents' house, and on the left was the kitchen, on the right was the garage, but straight ahead was her pantry. And so if you walked into the pantry, it was full of all kinds of home canned vegetables, fruits, berries, and meats. And so I would visit quite often, and Grandma would either be in her garden, or she would be baking, or she'd be sewing. So when I was young, she showed me how to sew. I mean, I'm not a seamstress, but I can alter, I can sew simple things, and that was a skill that I really appreciated that she passed down to me. So if you have these skills, you really, it's great to pass them down, because I remember her teaching me that. So it's a good thing because it's good memories. So anyways, I am going to try to follow an outline so I don't get off on rabbit trails. And but first, I want to let's just bow our head and say a prayer. So, Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for each and every person that came here today. Lord, help me to speak clearly and truthfully and pass on information that we could use to nourish our bodies and to preserve the food that you gave us. And I just thank you in Jesus' name, amen. So, get my clicker here. So I just call this Back to Basics, and I'm going to start by, well, I already asked you about if you've grown a garden or canning, and it's just a good skill that we can pass on. So the first thing I want to say is that, don't we have amazing bodies? I mean, think about it. We can talk, we can think, we can walk, you know, we have hands, feet. But have you ever thought about what actually makes our eyes see or our ears hear? It's pretty amazing. God actually made us in his image. And then he actually gave us the food to nourish our bodies. So this first slide says that God supplies our food. The psalmist says, I praise you for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And then he also said, every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you all things. So he's given us a lot of nourishing things that we can nourish our bodies for. So I'm going to talk about 4 things, actually. We're going to answer 4 questions. First of all is, why should you store grain? And then, what is enriched flour? What are the different types of wheat? And then, how do you mill the grain into flour? So, the first thing I want to do, and this is really important, is I actually want to talk about the anatomy of a wheat berry. So we all know that the stalk grows the seed or the grain at the top. For some reason, they call it a wheat berry. If you're going to order wheat, it's called a wheat berry. But all grains that God gave us have 3 parts. So God likes to give us examples in nature, right? He's the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, all grains have 3 parts. So I'm going to talk about the wheat because that's mostly what we use for flour. But all the grains do this. So the wheat berry has this outside brand, right? And the purpose of that brand is to protect that seed. So if it's stored properly, it's going to last for hundreds and centuries, actually. Archaeologists have dug up clay pots with seeds in them, and they were still viable. They planted them and they grew. So they actually kept dry, will store for years and years. So that's the bran, that's the part of that. Then the bottom is the germ, which it's got the part that's gonna sprout. So the bran, the germ, and then the endosperm is the makeup of the rest of that. So the nutritional part of that is very interesting. So the bran on the outside has fiber, which is actually soluble and insoluble fiber. That's really important. We tend to not eat enough fiber. B vitamins, minerals, and then the germ at the bottom, that is the healthiest part of the whole grain, and it has B vitamins, proteins, minerals, healthy oils, and high levels of vitamin E. I mean, that's amazing. And then the endosperm is the starchy carbohydrate protein that makes up the rest of the grain. So, So I had mentioned that all the grains have 3 parts like that, but there's a lot of other grains that you can store, like we're familiar with rice, barley, beans, lentil, corn, millet, quinoa. Have anybody had quinoa? Who's tried quinoa? That's great. I didn't try it till just recently. I really like it. It's got a lot of nutrients in it. So anyways, the first question was, why should we store grain? Okay, so the grain is the most nutrient-dense food that God has given us, okay? So, and I mentioned that it lasts for years if you store it properly, and food security. So if you are, we don't have hurricanes, but you've seen on when the hurricanes are coming, you've seen the films where the store shelves are empty. Well, we had the pandemic where, we didn't get our supplies to the store, and we were short on toilet paper. But so in cases of emergency, if you couldn't go to the store, how long can you feed your family with what's in the refrigerator, your freezer, or your pantry? So it's good food security because you can store it for quite a while. And then price increases. So when I bought wheat, like last year compared to this year, the prices have gone up. So it's kind of like a food investment, And then the last thing on there is grains can be milled into flour. And I'm going to show you about that too. So storing your grains. So basically, there is short-term storage and long-term storage. Short-term storage is just really putting your grains in an airtight container to keep them dry. Then if you wanted to store them long-term, and I have an example here. So if you want to store them long-term, you need to store them with an oxygen absorber. I use Mylar bags. It's kind of hard to see that picture there, but I'm going to show you. Well, actually, I got it here. So if you wanted to order like 5-gallon buckets or buy them, Menards sells 5-gallon buckets, and you can order them also. They come with a lid like this. It's got a big rubber seal that's in here, and they're like impossible to get off. But this little tool is sold at like Menards in the paint section. It's very inexpensive, and you can pry off your lids with that. That would be for long-term storage. But you can order them, you can order grains already packed in long-term storage, but you're going to pay a little more. But I have just here, this is called a Mylar bag. And so the purpose of this is to keep out oxygen and light. But if you had this like in your garage or somewhere where a mouse or something could get into it, or it can just get a hole poked into it. So it's best to put it inside a tote or a bucket like this. So I actually have done one up for you. So what I have here is 5 pounds of wheat that I have stored, and I have put an oxygen absorber in there. They come in different cc's, so depending on what size. And it's not going to take out all of the air. So think of it like a chip bag. The oxygen absorber is taking out or the oxygen, but not the air, so otherwise it would crush your chips, right? So it's not like vacuum packed, but this will last for a long, long, long time. So I have it in, this bucket is not a 5-gallon. So I have my short-term storage. So that's actually a picture of my cabinet above my mixer and my mill. And the very bottom is half-gallon sizes, and I have different kind of wheats there. The front little ones are like my baking soda and powder. So I like to use glass with, there's a sealing top on it, but any type of a container in your short term is fine. So what I do is I have my extra wheat, and I would take that from my pantry and then refill these. So instead of having that top that's really hard to get off, these are called a Gamma Seal, okay? And you can buy this at Menards. Actually, I did buy this at Menards, and they have white ones, but they come in colors too. So like I have at home red one, so if I store red wheat, it's just kind of a visual for me. And then what you do is, it comes with this ring, and it snaps on your bucket, and then it stays there, and then this just screws on and off. It's really easy to get in and out. So that can go on your buckets. So this bucket is not a 5-gallon. Where I get these is, this actually had frosting in it. So bakeries, if they have extra, will sell you these, and $2 or $3. And so I have several of these. The only thing about that is, if they have them, I'll buy them, 2 or 3 of them, and some of them will fit. This one fit on good, but some don't. So what I do with the ones that don't fit, you just kind of have to take a chance. I mean, it's a pretty good price, $2 or $3. I use them for my garden. So this is a little off topic, but if you don't have space for a garden, you can use buckets or containers. And so I'm going to try a new one. You can look this up, Google it. It's not new, but it's fairly new. It's called a wicking container. So what it is going to be, like I used to just put the holes in the bottom here and plant a tomato in it. Well, I'm constantly watering it because it's going to drain out. So a wicking bucket is actually, you don't put the holes in the bottom. The bottom has a reservoir for water, and there's a PCV pipe that you fill the bottom up with. There's a little bit of airspace, and then you have your plant in there. So you can do this on patios and if you don't have a garden space. So just, you have to look that one up. It's called wicking containers. And so that's what I do if they don't fit this on here, because I do use those buckets for other things. But I like this size because it's not as heavy for me to carry as the big tall ones. And they're inexpensive. So that's storing weight. Oh, and this was the oxygen absorber. Like I said, they come in different sizes. You can order those. So that's how we store short-term or long-term. And just another thing that we that's very nutritious is your nuts and your seeds. However, this I do not store in my pantry. I store my nuts and seeds in the freezer. Because of the oils, it won't last as long. I mean, it'll stay on your shelf for a while, but I just have a little bin that I put my nuts and seeds in my freezer. And that's where I store those. Very good nutrition. So our next thing we want to talk about is about the enriched flour. What is it? That was our next question. So remember, the grain has the 3 parts: the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. So when I would go to my grandmother's house, she had all the home canned stuff, but one thing on her shelf was always the flour bought from the store. And my mother, I bought it. I raised my kids on the white all-purpose enriched flour. So let's just talk about what happened with our flour. It used to be that from the very beginning, you would grind your grains and people would make some form of bread with it. And then the millers came where the millstones were there, and they would bring their grains to the miller and then bake their goods. But in the late 1800s to early 1900s, the big steel mills came into being. So what that did was they were able to mass produce flour. So they mass produced it, put it on the shelf, and they realized that it wasn't selling fast enough. And what would happen was, because it was just milled with all of the good bran and the germ, which had all the healthy oils, it would spoil. So they quickly decided they're going to strip that bran and the germ off, and all you're going to have is the fluffy white starchy protein. So they did that for a little bit, but then it was discovered that there was huge outbreaks of pellagra, beriberi disease, anemia, because all the nutrition was basically gone, and you just had your fluffy, starchy carbohydrate protein in there. So in 1940, the USDA, they mandated that you needed to enrich that flour back. So they were told that the mandate was they had to add back niacin, thiamine, riboflavin, and what's the other one? Four of them anyway. And so they enriched it back to help with those diseases, but what they did was they put it back with synthetic. So I'm just, thinking that my body's going to process natural ingredients better than the synthetic. So in about the 1990s, they discovered that you needed also folic acid for pregnant women because of the cell growth needed folic acid. So they basically put 5 synthetic nutrients back in that white sifted flour. So let's look at the difference between that sifted flour and if you fresh milled your flour. So fresh milled flour is a good source of fiber, vitamins, minerals, including iron, magnesium, potassium. It contains 40 of the 44 nutrients that your human body needs. Enriched flour has the bran and the germ sifted out with 5 synthetic nutrients added back. So quite a bit of difference there. So the information that I got for that, where it says 40 out of 44 nutrients, comes from Sue Becker. Sue Becker she's a Christian food scientist. She has like 9 children. They're mostly raised now. And when she was younger, she had some fresh milled bread, and she did her research. I mean, she was a food scientist, and she talks all over, and she actually has a store that her and her family do called Bread Becker's. It's down south. And so I got my information from her on this, but I also checked some other sources. And so I want to tell you that I am not a professional. I don't have a degree. I am not going to give you health, information. So you, medical advice, you need to do your own research. But that's a pretty interesting fact right there. And so I do have some information sheets that I will hand out to you. The one side's going to have the bread recipe, but it has like Sue Becker's name and her information, and some other ones, some of my favorite places to get recipes or if you're ordering wheat. So I would just say, please do your own research on that. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, besides that, they strip out, when they strip the bran and the germ out, and they just add those 5 synthetic vitamins in, there's still another thing that happens when you fresh mill your flour. So if I gave you an apple and you took a bite of it or sliced your apple and put it on your counter, it's going to start turning brown, okay? So that's called oxidation. We know that happens naturally. So if you mill your flour, and so now you're crushing the whole grain, and you got all those nutrients in there. If you left it on your counter for a couple days, it's going to oxidize out some of those nutrients just like an apple would. So if you think about that, so what I do for that is I mill just about what I need for the recipe, and then I will take anything left over and I will store it in my freezer. So when you bake with the fresh milled flour, it's going to stop the oxidation, but also then any leftover flour I put in the freezer for the next time. So if you think about that, so what about all the breads and the things that we can get in the store? Well, they're not fresh milled. As a matter of fact, if they say wheat, it doesn't actually mean that it's the whole part. So if I would go and I would read a label that said egg on it, it could be the yolk, it could be the white, it's still gonna say egg, right? Well, the same thing with wheat. So even if it says wheat bread, it can be minus the good parts and it's still gonna be wheat, right? So even if you buy whole grain flour, whole wheat flour in the store, how long has it been sitting there, you know? So it has already had time to oxidize. So that's just one of the big differences, I think, from the fresh milled to your enriched flour. Sounds like a good word, right? Okay, so how about, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about gluten. Okay, so if we have the three parts of the wheat berry, the bran, the germ, and the endosperm, where is the gluten? Or what is gluten? So what gluten is if you take and you mix water with that starchy protein, that's going to inform gluten. It's a glutinous material that forms, they call it gluten. And so what it is, it's going to give your bread structure. It happens naturally when you mix the water with the protein. And then if you didn't have that in your bread is going to fall down and it's going to be really heavy and dense. So that's what the purpose of the gluten is in your breads. So I think that, this is just my thinking, but if you think about all of the foods that we have in our store, and now this is only in the last 100 or so years, right? Before that, people milled their own, they ate the whole parts of the grain. So if you think about all the food that we have that is made with enriched flour, so all of the good parts are gone, all your packaged foods, besides all the added sugar that's in there, we as in America, we on average eat about 60 pounds of sugar a year. Think about that. So if you are eating a lot of the enriched flour that's mostly starch, what does your body do with starch? I mean, it's just like sugar, right? So I think that we've gotten a lot of food that is just made with that enriched flour, and so basically that's a lot of gluten. In some foods that you get, if you read your label, they actually add extra gluten to it, because gluten can be used, it can thicken your food, so you'll see gluten in a lot of stuff. So is there sensitivity to gluten? Yes, but I think that's because we've been eating so much of it, you know, just my thought. So anyways, I think that if I eat the whole thing, I'm gonna be able to digest better. But if you do have sensitivity, I'm gonna talk about the different grains. There are gluten-free grains that you can use. And so anyways, I do have a sheet that is gonna be available, and I do have my name and email there, so if you wanted to actually get a hold of me, I can send you this sheet. This sheet is called Facts About Gluten, and it's from the Michigan State University Extension Office. And I'll just read the titles on it. What is gluten? Is gluten a part of a healthy diet? Behind the gluten myth, or behind the gluten-free myths. So there's a lot of information. This is right from the Michigan State Extension Office. So very interesting. And so I have that listed on the sheet that I'm going to give you as a handout too. Okay, so I mentioned that if you read your labels, you're going to probably see wheat a lot in there, but it's most likely just the enriched part of the wheat. So next I want to talk about, we talked about why store grain, we talked about what the enriched flour is, and the next thing is going to be what types of wheat are there. There's a lot of types of wheat, but I'm going to give you, I don't want to be overwhelming, I'm going to give you the basic ones that we are common to get here, and basically there's two types. So go to, oh, that was what is enriched flour. We answered that question. And besides the enriched flour, you see the bottom says some of them are bleached. I mean, think about that. They're, besides stripping out all the good stuff, they actually bleach it out too. So that picture there, it says Pillsbury's Best all-purpose flour, and underneath it, it says enriched and bleached. Doesn't that sound yummy? Okay, so types of wheat. We have basically a hard wheat and a soft wheat that is readily available here. It's our modern or common wheats. So hard wheat is what you would use for yeast baking, okay? There's more protein in it, and it comes in red or white. The red is going to be a more nuttier, stronger flavor. The white is going to be more milder. So you would use the hard wheat for yeast baking. Then soft wheat is going to be, comes in the white or the red being the stronger, white being the milder, and that's for like non-yeast baking. So if I'm gonna make cakes or tortillas or pastas, I could use soft wheat. I don't have to use the hard wheat. So then there's also you'll see spring and winter. So it could say hard spring white wheat. I don't particularly pay a lot of attention to the spring or the winter because basically that just means when it was planted. So it was planted in the spring, harvested in the fall, or it could have been planted in the fall, gone through the winter, and harvested in the spring. So that would be called the winter wheat. I assume there's probably a different makeup between those two, maybe percentages of protein or something, but basically I don't worry about that when I'm ordering. I just usually order, the hard or the soft. I don't care about that, spring or winter. So our modern wheat is actually a descendant of 3 wheat species, okay? That would be spelt, einkorn, and emmer, which is sometimes called farro. So I'm going to talk about the ancient grains in a little bit. So our modern wheat basically is hybrid between those ancient grains. So when you, so the reason they do that is because in the south it's going to be hotter and drier, and so a certain variety will grow better than in the north where there's, it's cooler and they need that type of a species there. So the other thing that people ask or talk about besides that is the GMO, right? So does our modern wheat have GMO? Let's look at that. So our modern wheat contains no GMO, okay? There's no GMO, any of the processed wheat in the US sold does not contain GMO. So you can order it. I mean, it's going to say non-GMO, but they're all like that. They don't produce any in the United States that have GMO. They are a hybrid variety. So I just mentioned that there was a descendant of three of the ancients. So what is a hybrid variety? Well, if you wanted to go buy a Honeycrisp apple back in 1980, you couldn't get it because there was none. So the hybrid was basically cross-pollinated. The apples were cross-pollinated, and then the Honeycrisp was developed. So hybrids aren't necessarily bad. That doesn't bother me. I do try to order organic, okay? Because then I don't want, sprays and stuff, So I do try to do that. So other uses for grains. So I'm gonna, one of the things I'm gonna show you is how to mill some of these grains, but you can use these grains for many other uses. You can cook them, you can soak them like beans. We're familiar with that. You can sprout your grains. This is actually just wheat that I sprouted. I would eat, now this right here I have is sprouted wheat. So let's talk about that. So if you're sprouting your wheat, you remember the outside is going to get soft and it's going to start sprouting. There's a little sprout that'll come out from the germ. But what is it doing actually? So it's actually changing the chemical part of that grain, right? The bran is going to be dissolving, the sprout is going to come out, and that sprout is feeding off of the protein and the carbs, right? So it's actually using up some of the protein. So some people can tolerate sprouted wheat better because the sprout has used up some of that protein. You can also, so what I did here was it just takes a couple days to sprout wheat, and then I just dried it. You can use a dehydrator, but it kind of tends to want to blow out. So you can just dry it on a sheet. So this is dried sprouted wheat. If you look at it, you can see the little sprouts. I can then take and I can mill that and have sprouted wheat flour, which is going to have less gluten because the makeup has changed from its sprouting. Also, when it sprouts, it actually produces vitamin C. So it's pretty amazing how all of those nutrients are there. They change, but it gives us more nutrients. I mean, vitamin C is pretty cool. So besides, this is the wheat, you can sprout other seeds. You can have broccoli and other seeds that you sprout, and they're called microgreens if you let them grow. This is wheat, which I probably wouldn't eat. I would eat the sprouts, but some people do take this and put it in their smoothies. It's perfectly edible. I don't know if that would taste real great, but if you did, this is the little seed sprouting tray, and if you did like bean sprouts or your broccoli seeds, a lot of that is good nutrition, and you can let it develop into the microgreens. This here is actually, these are inexpensive. This has got a little screen on it. So when I sprouted, I put my berries in here, and then you rinse it a few times, and then you can put this on, and then it'll stand so the water drains out. So that's a whole nother thing about how to sprout that. I'm not going to get into that, but so you can use a lot of these berries and seeds even if you don't have the grain mill, because they're very nutritious, right? So that is the next question is going to be, well, I want to go over the ancient grains, and then we're going to talk about milling. So I mentioned that our modern wheat is a descendant from the ancient grains, but these ancient grains are still available. So einkorn, spelt, corazon is called kamut because if I ask for a facial tissue, you might give me Kleenex. It's just the brand of it. So for the most purpose, you're going to see it called kamut, one of my favorites actually. So farro, barley, you're familiar with, rye, bulgur. So those are ancient grains. I probably didn't realize that rye was an ancient grain. So then you have the gluten-free grains that are available still would be amaranth. Now, actually, teff is not available. It's grown in Ethiopia, and the Ethiopian government has banned any exports because they don't have a real big crop of it. And so that is the tiniest grain that actually is around. And then quinoa, we talked about that. And then sorghum. Now, these are all really got a lot of good nutrients in it, but I just looked up the last one just to read to you what is in sorghum. So the USDA recognizes sorghum as an incredible nutrient source, as a single serving contains significant amounts of protein, niacin, riboflavin, thiamine, copper, iron, potassium, magnesium, fiber, and antioxidants. That's in a single serving of sorghum. So quite nutritious, right? So it's pretty amazing. So I am going to next, and our final thing was how to mill the grains. So back in 2012, I started thinking about what was in my pantry, and I started thinking about my parents' canned and my grandparents, and I just how could I feed my family if it was an emergency? And so I started looking at the wheats. And so when I started out back in 2012, I did this. I ordered this Nutrimel and I ordered this Bosch mixer. And so I started making my breads. I used basically just the hard white wheat. And by the way, you don't have to have all these grains. You can basically make anything with the hard white wheat. And that's basically what I started with. So I bought this Nutrimil, and I bought the Bosch mixer, and I started making my bread. So I did that for years, and I didn't buy any bread in the store. So, however, I did not know, I knew that that bread was healthier, but I didn't really understand how much more the white flour. I was still baking with the white enriched flour, making cookies and pies. Well, as you get older, the weight kind of comes on, right? So I decided to get on board with one of the low-carb diets. So this is just my personal story, okay? So I stopped making my breads, and I went on this low-carb diet. So the first thing I got rid of course, on those was you get rid of the sugar, and you get rid of the junk food. So that's a good thing, you know? I know that my body is very addicted to sugar. So I was glad to get off of that. So then I had to get rid of the grains and the breads because that wasn't low carb. The fruits, well, most of them, the sugar, so you get rid of that. So then I'm on down to the vegetables, but you can't eat potatoes. So you are on just some vegetables and meats. So I was eating a lot of meats, a lot of bacon, a lot of cheese, not enough vegetables. And so I lost like 30 pounds. I was heavier than what I am now, but I didn't like staying on that because to me it just was, I was cutting out some of God's food groups, you know, real food. I call it real food, any of the food that you can get closest to the way God gave it to you, right? An apple, a potato, or whatever. So anyways, I had mentioned before about fiber. Well, I had gotten diverticulitis a few times before that, but in 2022, I ended up with and I was I didn't really want to stay on the low carb diet, but I was kind of on it, kind of not. So, but I wasn't eating that fiber, right? So I want to explain what diverticulitis is if you don't know. So most of us have about 5 foot of large intestine and colon, and you have little pockets that it may bother you, may not, but those little pockets can get food in them, and if it gets infected, you need to get an antibiotic. So I ended up having a bout of that. I got the antibiotic, got it cleared up, I'm good for a month, got it again, got it again, got it again. Okay, 4 times in the year 2022. So I was really sick at the end of the year. I had to go into the ER, they admitted me, and I had to get an IV antibiotic because those other ones weren't working. By the way, those antibiotics can really mess you up. I mean, they kill the good bacteria along with the bad bacteria, and it's you know, it was bad. So my doctor said I had to have a surgery. So January last year, January 23, I ended up having surgery. And 4 weeks later, because of complications, I had the same surgery again. So I was recovering from back-to-back surgery and thinking, I don't want to go on that low-carb diet. I didn't want to gain weight, but I didn't know what. So my daughter, she told me about Sue Becker. And so I watched her video, and that just made sense. It was what I was feeling all along. It was like, I don't want to cut out God's real food. And then I understood, because if you are not eating, and this is a problem that a lot of us don't eat enough fiber. So I mentioned that brand was soluble and insoluble fiber. Well, the insoluble fiber comes from the grains. It comes from fruit, like your skins of your fruits. And when you eat that, the insoluble fiber means you don't digest it, but it helps clean you out. And if you don't, then you can get infected. And, you know, constipation used to be a problem, an old person's problem, but more and more even young kids are having this problem. But what are we eating, you know? So anyways, I didn't want to get off on a long trail, a little bit of a side trail there, but I wanted to tell you that that's what I learned was all about the fiber was important and the nutrients. So I'm happy to say that God thank God that I am healed up really well. But so now I am back with my breads, which I love to make. But this time I am also making, all kinds of other things that I'm not using the white enriched flour. So I am going to talk about, we did the sprouting, how to mill your grain. So this was the mill that I bought back in 2012. It's called the Nutrimill, and there's several pictures up there. The one with the wheel is if you want to work out. That's non-electric. It's quite a workout, but if you didn't have electricity, it's good to have. So if you look at the very top one, that's a Nutrimill. That's what I have. This was, when I bought it, I think there was only this and maybe a Wondermill. There might have been more. So the Nutrimill, I like it. It has a lot of advantages. The one next to it is a Nutrimill also, but it's a wood one. And the wood ones have been kind of more popular because they like the looks of them. And then the one on the right is called a mock mill, and that's a picture of a wooden one. The wooden ones are more expensive, but this one here is, I got this more recent. This one is a mock mill 100. This comes in a mock mill 200, which has got a bigger motor. And so there's advantages to this one, and there's advantages to this one. So I am going to mill some grain from each of these, but let me explain this one first. Okay, when you get it, this extra rim is not on it. It just snaps on. I never take it off. It just basically makes it a bigger hopper to hold your grain in. And this one will hold a lot of grain, actually more than this one. So this one holds the grain here, and then there's a dial that's high and low. Most of the time just use high, but there's a setting for coarse or fine, and then your flour comes out under here. And when you pull this out, there's a gasket that fits really tight in there. And then when you push it in, if you don't have it in all the way, there's a yes and a no. So if you don't have it in all the way, it's going to go poof, and you're going to have flour all over. So you make sure that you put it in all the way. So then this one of the things that's a little bit harder to do, I'll go on this side, is that you have to open this, you spin it, and I usually do this over the sink because I do make a little bit of a mess, but then your flour is going to be in here. This is actually just a little extra filter, and then there's actually one here too that helps so that the flour doesn't poof everywhere. So when you first get this right here is going to be real sticky and hard, and it's recommended to put flour on it. So I do not wash this container very often. If I do, then I have to dry it real well, and then I have to put a little flour on there. So the other thing that you have to remember is that you do not put any kind of wet ingredients in here. You cannot do oily like flaxseed or anything oily, anything wet. So this is for dry mill. So let's put this back in and make sure it's in all the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mill a half a cup of grain in here, and then I'll do this one here. So I will probably have you turn the mic off. But the one thing that you can do with this one though is you can put the grain right in, so it'll hold a lot. This one you can't, you got to turn it on before you put the grain in. So I am going to go ahead, and it's a little loud, so we'll kill the mic. Okay, so let's turn it on. Back on? Okay, so when you hear that high pitch at the end, it sounds like an airplane. That means that the last of the grain went through. So that's the Nutrimill. And so then, I'll open this up for you, and so you'll see that there's the flowers in there. When you look at it, you'll actually see, like, you could probably see some of the bran in there. It's a little bit darker. So I'm gonna put this like this so you can see that later. Okay, so we're gonna do, the next one is the mock mill. And, oh, I got a question?
Yeah, is the volume going in about the same as the volume going out?
That's a good question. No. So when you're milling, if I would mill, like my recipe, I will use 3 cups of berries, and that will give me about 4.5 cups of flour.
Really?
Yes, it's fluffier. So yes, you do get more volume. So I do try to just, and you get used to that, but when I'm gonna do the recipe, I wanna just mill what I need. So I do count for that, you know, because it's gonna be more. So.
Yeah, I read down this question too, because I know you said that, like, doing milling oats was simpler in one of them, harder in one of them, or simpler in one of them. I don't know.
Okay, if you wanted to do oats, oat groats is what it's called, and actually I think I have some here. So the oat groats I don't do in here. I actually have a flaker. I guess I've never tried it. It's a little bit more oily, so I actually put it through a flaker. And oats, so oat groats, what oat groats is if you bought steel cut oats before, basically it's the whole oat groats, the outer hull is gone. And then the steel cut is that it's just cut. So it just cooks a little bit quicker than if you cook the whole oat groats. The whole oat is actually really good when you cook it, it just takes longer. And then when you buy the oatmeal that we call, that's actually just pressed oats. So that is one thing that you can buy in the store that isn't really processed. If you buy the old-fashioned oats, it's pretty much just pressed oats. A lot of other stuff has got extra ingredients and all that in there. But I don't really, what I do is like, I do have, if I want to make oatmeal cookies, I will just pop it in a bullet or blender, you know, to make it more like, I don't know, I guess I've never ran it through.
Yeah, I thought you said when it's over that.
Yeah.
One of the grains, I thought it was
Yeah.
the
So, yeah. Okay, so let me try this one. So this is called the Mock Mill 100, and I'm going to turn it on and then run it through, and we'll see how this one comes out. So that's this one. I should have timed it to see, because they were both half cup. So this one, an advantage I like about this one is that I can just, you know, put my bowl right there, and it's just really handy. A little bit easier to get into than this, but, you know, each one, they work very well. It's just a matter of price or which convenient. This is a little bit smaller on your counter. So there's the bottom one here is called a Wonder Mill, and that is a little bit different in that the flour is on the side. That's a good one too. So they're really, you know, they're just different features. They're all good. You can do your own research on that, and they all work really well. So let's look at when you're actually baking with it. So I said that you get more flour than the berries when you grind them. So if you're baking with fresh mill flour, one of the things, well, there's three things that I have that I label as troubleshooting. And basically, one of the things is that your sifted flour is going to be, it's sifted and it's heavy, and you're used to like a cup of this, is not going to be the same as a cup of the fresh milk because it's fluffier. And so it's going to be like 1 cup of enriched flour is going to be like 1.25 cups of the fresh mill flour. So I really suggest using recipes, especially starting, that are designed for fresh mill flour. They're just kind of the liquid and the amounts will be there. I do like to use grams instead of cups, and that does help if you have a weight. You can use the grams. I do like to use that. So when you're baking with the fresh mill flour, so one of the things that you're going to find is that, so I use the recipe, I put my bread ingredients in here and I mix it up. Well, it's going to look soupy. It's going to look really wet. So one of the first things that we might end up doing would be putting too much flour in it because we're not used to that. So what I do is, and you could just kind of get used to this. My daughter does it a little different, but on this recipe, I will put all my ingredients except for the yeast, and then I'll mix it up, and then I will let it soak. Okay, it's going to absorb a lot of the liquid, so you don't really need that extra flour in it. And so that may sound like a lot of process, but so I usually I'm going to bake. I don't bake every day. So if it's a baking day, I'll put my ingredients in here, I'll mix it up, and then I will just let it set. I'll put a timer on, I'll do laundry, whatever, and then when the timer comes off, and it could be 15, 20 minutes, then I will put my yeast. I measure my yeast out so I don't forget to put it in, and then I'll put my yeast in, and then I will continue to let it knead. So the second problem that you might run into is under kneading, okay? So it does take a while. And if you don't have, now this is the Bosch mixer. I'll tell you a little bit about this. This is, it's got a really huge bread dough paddle, and it's supposed to do maybe like 6 loaves of bread. I've done 4. I've never made 6 at one time. And it's got 800 watt motor, so it's very powerful. But if you have like a KitchenAid that has bread dough hooks, if you don't have either of those, a real way to do it is if you have a bread machine. Sometimes you find them at rummage sales or Vinnie's or whatever. The bread machine will have a dough cycle, and it has a paddle. So you can just use that. Or if you don't think you even have time to make bread, you can just make the bread in the bread machine. And actually they have some really cool new ones out that make really nice loaves of bread. So, but I like to make it in the tins. So this picture up here, the second thing is to make sure you're kneading it long enough. And so this picture, the first picture is actually the dough that I have my hand stretched out, and you can kind of see the light through it. That's called a window pane. So you want to knead your dough long enough so that it's stretchy. And I don't always do it to that window pane, but if your dough is real sticky and you pull it apart and it just breaks right away, it's not got enough kneading time. So it's going to need to knead a little longer. So I just put it on and let it knead. So then the next thing is I'm going to put my dough in the bowl. That's my bowl there right off of the mixer. And the third thing that you might not do or find a problem with is underproofing it. So that means you're going to let it rise twice. It's going to rise in that bowl, and then this picture here is where it's doubled. Okay, it's doubled or even more. So that was the mixing. Then it's risen up, and then after that, I take it out and I put it on my scale, which you don't have to do. You can just divide it up. The recipe that I have and that I'll give you makes 2 1-pound loaves. So I divide it. I like to roll it sometimes. Sometimes I just shape it. It's not necessary. I like to roll it. It's really cool because your bread is like a little roll. So then you're seeing that I have the 2 1-pound loaves there. I divided it. Then that's your second rise. You're going to let it rise in the pan till it's a couple inches above the pan. and then you're baking it, and it comes out like that, pops out. And then the bottom picture is from my daughter. She likes to make a 2-pound loaf, and that's got, the picture behind there, if you can see it, is called a Pullman pan, and it makes a 2-pound sandwich loaf. So she likes to make sandwiches for her husband's lunch, and that is the 2-pound size there. So that recipe can make 2 1-pounds or a 2-pound loaf. So, but you need to let it rise, and and it'll take a couple hours or more. It depends on how warm your kitchen is. So again, I'm kind of like a multitasker. I will be, letting the bread rise while I'm cooking. If it's a cooking day, I'm going to make extra things and put some in the freezer. So if you plan ahead, it's kind of it's part of my baking day, or doing laundry or something like that. Question?
What yeast do you use in like that?
Okay.
After use, but I see a lot of the videos that I've watched use instant and like that.
Yes, that is still under research. Okay. So what she asked was what kind of yeast. So there is, okay, this is the difference. You can buy active dry yeast, and this is the way I remember it. The dry yeast means that you need to put the liquid in there and let it proof. Okay, it's dry, and so you've got to put some of your liquid in, and you're going to see it foam up, and then you know it's good. The instant yeast is where you can just put it in your dough, and it doesn't need to have that proofing time. It's instantly, it goes in. So that's the difference between active dry yeast and instant yeast. So the recipe that I have here is instant yeast. So what I do is, because I want that flour to soak up, I put all my ingredients except for the yeast in, and then I can add the yeast last because it's instant yeast. Now, I have done the active dry yeast and it worked the same way, So if you're going to use that dry active yeast, what you could do is take some of the liquid amount that you're using in a recipe and then put that in with the yeast and let it set while your flour is soaking up the rest, and then add it. So, and my daughter does probably something different. She doesn't want me to call on her, but okay, so I hope that answered the question.
Oh yeah, no, that's what.
Okay.
I've been using the active, and it takes, they're still just, my loaves are still just a little heavy. I've only had mine for about a month now.
Yeah, okay. And so what I really suggest is, if you're trying this, is to use the same recipe and make it several times so you get used to how it comes out. And then, because if you're using, there's a lot of different recipes. So I use this recipe, and then I use this recipe. Well, I can't really compare because it might have been the recipe that was different. So I try to use the same recipe to like get it down. And then, like my daughter uses, she kind of goes by a recipe that we did back when I had my, in 2012, I made a recipe that was called Easy Bread, and it contained potato flakes and powdered milk and vinegar. So it was different than the one that I use from Breadbeckers now. But you can try different things, and you can try different grains, but I would suggest using that same recipe till you get it down and you know how it's gonna work out, okay? So, let's look at that recipe. So this is actually from Breadbeckers. Sue, I actually have this little red book you can buy from her. Sue had this recipe book out from years ago, so she's got different fresh milled recipes in here, and she has the basic bread recipe, and so I have it on here, but I changed the order of it because I like to do things in the order of the way that you put them in, okay? And then this actually book too here is from Sue Becker, and it's got a lot of good recipes in for homegrown flour. So this recipe, I changed it in the order. So it's her recipe. So I start with the water, then the oil, the honey. By the way, if you're going to use syrup or honey, and I try to use natural, I do use Sucanat, but measure your oil first, because then the honey or the syrup will just come right out. It's like really cool. It's like really cool. So then I put all of my, now the egg is optional. Lecithin. So what is lecithin? So I use an organic sunflower powder lecithin. Lecithin is going to be like an emulsifier, and it makes your bread soft. You can, I think, substitute tomato or lemon juice instead of that. My daughter uses vinegar, so you can try different things. You don't have to do that. I really like the lecithin in it, but you know, if you want to just use the things you have, she uses potato flakes that's got the starch in it. So then I use 4.5 cups of fresh milled flour, which I said I use 3 cups of berries to get that, and then there's a 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup of flaxseed. I really like the flaxseed in there. So I don't grind the flaxseed with my mills. I use just a coffee grinder, and it'll hold a 1/4 cup. I found that I just measure a 1/4 cup of that in my little coffee grinder, and I use the flax in there. I really like it. And then, like I said, I measure that, and I put the yeast in last. So that is the Bread Becker's recipe, and I'm going to have that as a handout. So I would like to, I got a few tips for saving extra money, but how many of you like goldfish crackers or give your kids goldfish crackers? Would you like to taste fresh milled homemade goldfish crackers? So my daughter has made those for you, and she's made graham crackers out of fresh milk. And then I have in the back, there's some samples that you can try. We're going to have a break. We're going to do a drawing first. And there's actually some different cookies that I made with fresh milk and bread. I wanted you to try the bread. So what I did was, I didn't want it to dry out. I'm hoping it's not going to dry out, but I cut it in like little quarters. And so we're going to have that for you, and there's some butter and there's some jam. You can try it with that. So, but let me just say, these are some of the things that you can make with your fresh milled. So I said that I not only went to making bread, I do all kinds of other things. So the first 3 things on there, the bread, the rolls, and the buns, can be made with this basic recipe. I love it because I can make hamburger buns. What I do is I'll make 1 loaf of bread, and then the other half I'll make dinner rolls or I'll make hamburger buns, all with the same dough. And then there's quick breads, cakes, cookies, muffins, crackers, tortilla shells are really very tasty. Pasta. You'll have to ask, my husband is the one who's doing the sound here. You'll have to ask him how my lasagna is with the fresh milled pasta. It's like awesome. And then pizza dough. So the pizza dough is really cool. I got a good recipe for that. It makes a great big thing of pizza. Pizza is his favorite food. And then I take the other half and I stick it in the freezer. So when I want to have pizza, I take it out of the freezer, stick it in the fridge, and it can sit there for a day or 2. It'll kind of rise a little bit, but it's whenever I want to make pizza, I have the dough ready. You can make 2 small ones or a big large one, and it's really, really good. It works out great. You don't even have to roll it out. It presses out in the pan. So those are the different things that you can make. And Elena, you got the bucket. Okay, this is my granddaughter. She's going to bring the bucket up. Okay, for the door prize. So just tips for saving money. So when you're shopping, I mean, food is ridiculous price now, right? If you buy extra things that you know, like if I buy a certain ketchup and it's on sale, buy 2 or 3. Put the new one in the back, rotate your food. Make your own seasonings. It's really easy to make taco seasoning. If you make your own, you don't have, I mean, it's inexpensive in a little package, but think about it. Look at what's in those ingredients, right? If you make it, you know what's in it. And then larger quantities are usually a better buy. We all have our phones, so you can actually do the ounces. And what I like to do is, I like cheese, but I don't buy shredded cheese. 2 reasons. One, if you buy shredded cheese, you're paying more because of the convenience of the shredded cheese. And 2, you have all the extra fillers and ingredients, anti-caking agencies in the cheese, right? So I go to Gordon's and I buy the 5-pound block of cheddar, mozzarella, and then this Bosch mixer here has a food attachment, but even if I didn't have that, I have grated by hand. Freeze it on a cookie sheet, and then I take it and I put it in small bags, and then actually really, I don't know if I have one here. Gordon's has these 2-gallon bags. They're great. So I put all the little bags inside the big bags so they're not rolling around in my freezer, and I have shredded cheese. So I have real cheese at a better price. So that's a good thing to do. So if you plan ahead, and I said, like when I do my baking, I will make soups. I will take a Ziploc bag, and I don't want to eat soup for 5 days, but I will take and put a gallon half full, seal it, put it on a cookie sheet, and it'll freeze flat. Then I can take different soups and put them in that 2-gallon zip in my freezer. I have different soups. It's great for a busy day. Make 2 meatloaves, put one in the freezer. Make stuff that you can throw in your slow cooker. So if you plan ahead, you can save money because you're going to be eating at home and it's going to be wholesome. Also, think about when you go out to eat. I mean, the breads that you're getting, if you order, a hamburger, the bun is going to be enriched flour, right? All of that stuff is. So anyways, that's my tip for saving money. So we are going to do 2 drawings, a little short break, and there's samples for you to try out there. And then we're going to do the second part. The second part's not going to be as long. Boy, I didn't bore you. Okay, so ticket number 2182013. So we have a loaf of bread. Now, I know that Jamie, no, you keep it. Well, if you win again, well. So Jamie does his own grinding already and makes bread. Yeah. So let's do another one. Okay. Okay, this number is 2182023. Okay. So we have another loaf of bread. So this is the Bread Becker's bread. Okay, you are welcome. Okay, so if you want to come up here and look at any of the grains, or if you want to go try this, we're going to take a 15-minute break or so, and then we'll do the second part. And we'll do a drawing then too. We should have coffee, water, and different samples out there. Which one?